Welcome everybody to our Kirstenbosch Wednesday talk, brought to you by Room to Grow, Sandby and Straight Nature. This is our final talk for the year, and we're really excited to finish off the year on this high note. It's been a year full of exciting talks, and I think this is a fitting way to finish our year off. And I'd like to just start off by thanking our sponsors. Firstly, Straight Nature. Straight Nature is the leading specialist natural history publisher in Southern Africa and is associated with the best-selling and most highly regarded field guides in the region. Straight Nature publishes full-color illustrated books across a variety of subject areas, including birds, mammals, reptiles, trees and flowers, the marine environment, geology, astronomy, general wildlife, and of course the ever-popular children's nature. And then from myself, Room to Grow, Room to Grow has been designing and creating outdoor living spaces in and around Cape Town since 2002. And we offer a complete suite of landscape design, construction, and associated elements from our design studio. You can find out more about us at roomtogrow.co.za or follow us on our socials. And then it's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Lynn Katsoulis. She is a systems ecologist and restoration strategist whose work bridges science, culture, and community action. Her career spans corporate health research, ecological restoration, and environmental education, and she's known for turning complex science into practical, empowering tools for change. As usual, we will have a Q&A session at the end, so while the talk is going on, you're welcome to pop those into the Q&A box, and then we'll get them to the end. But as it's our final talk, we've got something a little bit different today. We've got some prizes to give away, and during the talk, Lynn is going to pop some questions into the presentation, and then there'll be a few slides until the answer is given, and we will then, you people have an opportunity to answer the question, and then we will choose some winners for some book giveaways at the end of the talk. So Lynn, very excited for this, and over to you. Thank you.
Great. Now, hello, everyone. And what a wonderful way to end the year to find a little bit how we can restore nature. So just to start off with, and why we have to try and restore as much as we can, is we have entered into a different geological epoch, which we've moved from the Holocene to the Anthropocene. And we've moved from an age of stability where the last sort of almost 12,500 years, Earth has been very, very stable. And through that, we've got stable ecosystems, and our world was filled with so much wonderful life until the 1950s, roughly. But since then, humans have been the ones that have been authoring the change. Before then, it was all the natural forces that governed the Earth systems, which then got into equilibrium after many, many years. But now, with humans riding, with all our activities, we're overriding natural systems. And we are now the dominant driver for geological ecosystems, and some of the changes are disastrous. For example, we have changed the carbon cycle. We've reversed it from plants capturing carbon from the air and sort of fossilizing it into our fossil reserves. We've decreased the wilderness areas to less than 23% and the wilderness areas remain. We've got more than 55% of habitable land has been transformed for human use, and many other of human activities are leading to catastrophic levels of species extinction. And it doesn't have to be like that. We can live differently. So if you look at the biodiversity intactness index across the world, you can see black is where biodiversity is still intact, where as it goes towards the yellow and white, it's where biodiversity, the systems are no longer functional, and we are in a state of dysfunction, and things just cannot carry on, and they will get worse if we don't change the trajectory we're on. So if you look at the South African, we're not doing well at all, even though we have enormous amount of investment and we are very proud of our natural and protected areas. It's nowhere nearly enough. As a country, we are still in a negative and losing far too much biodiversity, and we absolutely have to change the way we are living. If you look at the top 10 global risks by severity that have been identified by the World Economic Forum, you'll see of the green ones, 5 of the top 10 risks to humanity are environmental. with the main ones being climate change and extreme weather, with the third one being a loss of biodiversity. And if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see biodiversity is interlinked with every other risk identified for the planet. Biodiversity is connected to all of them. We absolutely have to change the way we are protecting our biodiversity and find ways that we can once again live side by side with nature. We all know that nature is planet's life support system, but few of us realize that biodiversity is nature's immune system. If you just think from a health point of view, if a system has an impaired immune system, it leads to infections. And the analogy with nature, it's the invasive exotics come through and infect our ecosystems. We also lead to cancer, where we remove our own controlled systems and it leads to uncontrolled growth. So, and then impaired healing, you have a decreased resilience. And with climate change, if the ecosystems are unable to heal themselves, it further damages the system and you go into like a negative feedback loop. And then that can lead into an autoimmune disease. And you see this in ecosystems where you remove the control systems, some organism that would be beneficial within a complete ecosystem suddenly starts attacking itself, and you almost get like an autoimmune disease within an ecosystem. So what's the way forward? If you look back and sort of the reasons why humans have harmed nature, it's largely through ignorance. It's very easy for us to sit with hindsight, and say, our forefathers should have done things differently. But they didn't know. They were ignorant. We are now informed. It's in our hands. Technology, if we use it for the good, if we use information that's available to us now, we can be different. And so we have to move forward with responsibility, courage, creative, and a collective resolve. What we cannot do is go forward with defeat, resignation, and pacificity. It's us that are more informed that absolutely have to take the lead and start changing the way the collective work. Now, if you look in South Africa, this is all the protected areas, where the protected areas in our country are really focused on large mammals, and a bit later came the plants. Ecosystems are seldom the topic of designating areas for protection. And they are so disparate. And look, there's no corridors between these protected areas. On the right-hand side, this is SANBI's latest assessment of biodiversity. And they're saying within 7 years, these are the areas where animals are having increased levels of threats. In other words, the populations are going down. And SANBI doesn't measure many organisms. Insects are hardly measured here. Insects are only your butterflies and your dragonflies are the only insects that are monitored. But you can see how catastrophic this is. In geological terms, what is 7 years? It's not even a blink of an eyelid. But yet in that short time, you're having this decrease, and we're being able to pick up the decrease in animals in such a short period of time. And if you look at this, and maybe later you guys can download this kind of map, and look at, even in the protected areas, look at the Kruger Park. Kruger Park should be protecting biodiversity, but look, even our animals within our protected areas are having increased levels of threats to them. We're doing a lot very wrong. We're doing a lot right, but we have to correct a lot of what we're doing wrong. Another map to show the same concept is the biodiversity hotspots. So the more red it is, the greater the biodiversity, where the green showing you where the protected areas are. And what I'm trying to highlight with this map is we are not in a position where us living in farms or urban areas where nature is not protected. It's in those places where biodiversity loss is at its greatest. We are no longer in a position where we can say we can rely on other people protecting our nature. Every single one of us has to be able to protect nature in our own back garden and do what we can and to be able to protect nature. Just to drive this home a bit more, this is the map showing the butterflies that are on the brink. So the colors, ranging from orange through to purple and black, show the increasing threats to our populations of butterflies. So the orange being those that are rare or threatened, the reds being sort of critically endangered, or the purples are critically endangered, and the black are already extinct. And, we're not monitoring insects. If a butterfly is threatened or the populations vanish, you can take that as representing at least another 100 insects, another 100 species are going extinct. And often it's going to be insects that we never even knew existed. Some that never even been characterized are going to disappear before we even know that they were there. So we have to move away from protecting individual species, which has been the historical approach to conservation. And often it's our charismatic species like our rhinos or our elephants or our lions. I'm not saying that they're not important, but what I'm saying, if we're going to protect biodiversity as a whole, we have to look at whole ecosystems and how to get our ecosystems functional and resilient once again. And in order to do that, we need to go back to our primary school levels of education, where we were taught that it's all about our trophic food pyramids, where everything starts at the bottom with healthy soils. We have to have our soils once again where they are teeming with life. If you put a spade into your garden soil, it should be full of earthworms, cockroaches, beetles, fungi, bacteria. It should be teeming with life. And once that's happened, they are sort of the digestive system of your ecosystem and be able to break down all the nutrients so that plants can take them up, very much like the microbes in your own gut system, and they need to make the nutrients available to the whole system. And once you've got your living soil, you then need to have your plants, and the plants that specifically feed the herbivores. Then your herbivores that feed on those plants, and then the predators, and in turn, and then your apex predators. And once you have those complex food webs, which are all interlinked, then only can we have a resilient ecosystem. Now, we can do this with our knowledge today. We can have various levels of ecosystems. I'm not saying we have to bring our large predators back into our urban areas, but we do need predators. Your predators can be as much as a wasp, or an owl, or, something that we're more than willing to work with. But we need to be able to bring functional ecosystems where we have our predators controlling the primary consumers and the herbivores. But what few of us do is focus on the interface between herbivores and herbivores. And this is where I've been focusing my research and work over the last couple of years, is once I realized that herbivores are fussy. We as humans have got the most diverse diet of any animal that has ever walked this planet. But yet we cannot go and live, in a grassland and be successful as a species, grow up our family, have enough children, and they in turn have their children and have, stable populations of humans in our own ecosystems. We can't do it. But yet we go and plant whatever plant we want in our gardens, and we just expect life to magically appear. And it doesn't work like that. Our animals are far fussier than we realize. And I'm not going to cover it in this talk, but just think of it. We all know what, giraffe eat acacias. Silkworms only eat mulberry leaves. Bush babies eat insects and predominantly moths and gum from acacia trees. All animals have a very, very limited diet. In other words, their own digestive systems only have the enzymes capable of digesting a very, very narrow group of compounds. So you have to feed animals what the digestive systems can digest, and it's far narrower than any of us have ever imagined. So how are we working out who eats what? And that's really what I've been trying to do, trying to make sure we get the right plants there to feed the herbivores that we want, and in turn feed the right predators. So focusing on this system, here I've given you a pie chart of all the diversity of animals. So not the biomass of animals, but the diversity. And from this, you can see, that protists, are fairly abundant, and fungi, and then plants. And then down in the oranges, we've got sort of all our invertebrates that come up to our insects. And you can see the insects in the various shades of yellow form 50% of all the diversity of life on Earth. And then in pink, it's everything, all the deuterostomes to your vertebrates. In other words, everything from a starfish through to humans are that small narrow band in pink. So humans really only being one species, yet we are having this catastrophic impact on the whole planet. But from this pie chart, we can see that insects should be our focus of, or not our focus, but certainly an integral part of any conservation. We have to have strategies to be able to restore and conserve insects because they form such a crucial part of ecosystems. They're involved in controlling our plants, making sure no plants become, over dominant. They're involved in feeding the higher trophic levels. They're involved in decomposition and so many other extremely important processes. And let me not forget pollination also. So let's, out of this whole system of all your different animals, where are your herbivores, focusing on that interface between plants, herbivores and plants? So we've got our grasshoppers. They're generalists. They'll eat many, many plants, far more, probably not as wide as we think, but they'll eat almost any grass, far wider than what your buck can use. You've got your snails and slugs. You can put a whole lot of exotic plants, and your slugs and snails will do pretty well. So they're not over fussy. Then we've got our bugs. Bugs are very, very diverse. Our true bugs, some are specific feeders, others are not. But we don't know much about them. There's been very little information out there about which bugs eat what. And then you've got your beetles. Again, range, some are carnivorous, some are herbivorous, some of them herbivorous as larvae, some are herbivorous as, I think, a very, very complex group. And again, we don't really know much about our host plant association, so we can't use them to tell us what to plant. Then you've got all your pollinators. The pollinators are essential, but just by nature, pollinators are generalists. Because they will take pollen from anything. They really don't mind where they get their pollen and their nectar. And most of insects actually going after nectar. Nectar is nectar. It's like us trying to go get cold drink. We're not going to care what kind of cold drink as long as we get our cold drink. And it's the same with the pollinators. They are generalists. So we cannot use them to guide what we're going to plant. So what we really need to do is feed our fussy eaters. So if you think of, if you're going to having a whole lot of people over for dinner, if you're going to choose the diet, of your hamburgers and chips, it's all your fussier eaters, those who, sort of gluten intolerant or vegetarians, whatever, aren't going to be able to feed on that meal of hamburgers and chips. But however, if you find out your fussiest guest and you go and cater for the fussy guest, then everybody can eat. And it's that concept that we need to use when trying to choose who's going to eat. And everyone that I've shown you over there, they predominantly are either generalist eaters or we don't know much about them. Then you get your megafauna, so all your buck and some of your omnivorous larger animals. And even your little animals, some of them are herbivores. But again, by nature, because they're big, they cannot be too fussy. And most of them are generalist eaters, but we know a lot about them. So we can use them in our data sets of working out what we need to plant. But it's our Lepidoptera. It's our caterpillars. You all know from rearing silkworms that silkworms are the fussiest of the fussiest. They're only going to sustain certain generations if you give them mulberry leaves, nothing else. And it's the same with almost all our Lepidoptera. They can only eat either one plant or a small group of plants in order to be able to sustain and to pass on through several generations. And this is why I'm using Lepidoptera as my main group to be able to predict what to plant where. And also, they're very well researched. It's one of those the groups of animals that were heavily studied by the gentlemen explorers of the bygone era. So we've got extensive records on the distribution of butterflies. And now with the work with the caterpillar rearing group recently, we've now got extensive data on which caterpillars eat which plants. So now we've got this invaluable resource that we can now use to be able to predict what plants to use where to be able to restore our ecosystems. And another reason why we need to focus on our butterflies is if you think of the larger mammals like your lions, your tigers, and so your large predators, your leopards, we know that the little buck and the buck, are the mainstay diet for our large predators. Now, in the same way, caterpillars are the mainstay food source for most of your smaller animals, your smaller, your hedgehogs and your lizards and all of those, and also your birds. If you had to imagine, a bird feeding, you always sort of think of a bird feeding a worm to its nestlings. But in many cases, it's actually caterpillars. And think about it. You're not going to see your birds, your smaller birds with triangle beaks. They're not going to go digging in the soil for earthworms. They are picking off caterpillars. And the research has shown at about, close on 80, 90% of the birds out there, whether they're insectivorous or herbivorous, or fruit eaters, most birds feed caterpillars to the young, and many of them feed on caterpillars even as adults. So if you're going to plant the wrong plants that don't have caterpillars, the nestlings are going to starve. Maybe one or two would survive in a group rather than all three. So if we want our nice fat bird nestlings and for them all to survive, we need to be able to plant the right plants in order to be able to get the caterpillars. And we also need to move away from, as a society, we go into our gardens and we see an eaten leaf or something in the garden. We've got to change our perception. If we're going to see eaten leaves, what a blessing. We are supporting the ecosystem. We have got to move away from the desire to have these sterile gardens where nothing moves around them. And let's move into having these gardens that are alive. I made the shift, probably I'm a botanist by training. My first degrees were in botany. I also had this beautiful sterile garden with a cupboard full of poisons, and anything that ate it are poisoned. But it didn't take me long to realize how foolish we're doing. And now I plant to get them eaten, and I get super excited if I have a leaf that's eaten. And now I even go to nurseries looking for plants that are eaten. And through that, you get this beautifully alive garden, which I have here in Johannesburg. I've probably got a bigger diversity of bees than most botanical gardens in the country, and butterflies, and you name it. And friends come to my garden to watch birds. A bigger diversity, and we're sitting right in the middle of a big urban area with small properties. It really does work. If we plant for the right things, we get an alive garden. And this is what I'm trying to show you how to do. So and I've given you the answer. If you get this one wrong, then you're not forgiven. So when selecting plants for herbivores to feed, which choice supports the greatest biodiversity? Is it going to be bees, bugs, birds, or butterflies? You can put your answer in the chat group. I can't see them, so you can carry on, and the first one's going to win. So taking this data from the caterpillar rearing group, which any of you, please, I'd urge all of you to be able to contribute to the caterpillar rearing group. If you see a caterpillar you don't know, especially in wild areas, take the caterpillar, put it in a box, rear it as if it was a silkworm, take photos all along, and then you can add the data to the caterpillar rearing group on INAT. And it's through a citizen science project that I have all the data that we have that I'll be presenting today, which is the foundation of what we're presenting. So if you take all the caterpillars that have been reared, this is from the caterpillar rearing group, where there's over 14,000 different rearings, over 7,500 different species of Lepidoptera. You'll see that and this is plotted, that on the y-axis, you've got the number of caterpillar species that feed on each individual plant. And you'll see there that the Vitilia carew is by far the plant that produces and that feeds, and really by far, the most number of caterpillars. Over 156 different species of caterpillars feed on Vitilia carew, where the next one being, I forget now which one it is, I think it's Gymnosporia, which is number 2, which is just over 80. And then it drops down very, very sharply and down to, those on the other extreme, like the 7,500. So this is 2,030 plants on the x-axis, and by the last one, it's only supporting one species. So what I've done is I've gone and ranked plants, basically by the number of species that they support, and. Sorry, this is not coming out properly. But anyway, you can see the concept here. So if you're going to be able to choose plants that support biodiversity, and it's a very, very, very small proportion of plants. Sorry, I've taken a slide out here, so I lost my train of thought. I'm trying in interest of time. So anyway, so basically just going back a little bit. So if you go back to that slide here, you'll see that. Sorry, I've taken out a crucial slide in my presentation. I think it's just in the wrong order. All right. Yeah, I'll catch up. Just hold on. What is happening here? Okay, sorry. Okay, so basically what I'm trying to show you in this graph here is that it's a really, really small percentage of plants that support biodiversity. So if you look at the bottom set of axes, you'll see that out of all your indigenous plants, if you look at where it says from 14, it's only less than 10% of your plants that are eaten by caterpillars. Just think about that. And if you're going to go and choose plants in an indigenous nursery, 90% of your plants do not support a single Lepidoptera. And you can look across different groups of animals. When I first saw this data, I was probably as surprised as anybody else was, what a tiny, tiny percentage of plants actually support life. And then I went and looked at data for other different groups, for your large mammals and all the other groups where we got extensive data on who eats what. And the same pattern has been found in most ecosystems. It's anything between 6 and 10% of plants are actually eaten by herbivores. In other words, plants do a pretty good job in stopping animals eating them. Plants do not want to get eaten. And it's only a few that have learned to be able to complain or adapted to be able to survive with animals eating them. And so here you can see from the bottom curve that all, in this case, there's a bit of extrapolation here. So roughly about 14% of all indigenous plants feed 100% of your Lepidoptera. And about 5.5% of your plants support 80% of all your Lepidoptera. So that's all your moths and butterflies, where there's 10 different moth species for every butterfly species. So if we can focus on the few plants that support butterflies, and it's mainly the same plants that often support your pollinators and all the other plants, you can really increase your efficiency in being able to bring back life to whatever area you're restoring, whether it be your back garden, the local park, a game reserve, or a mine area that's being restored. And at the top set of axes would be what you'd have to do to be able to, if you did not prioritize plants according to the biodiversity support index, you'd see let's say you're in an area where there's 800 different species of plants, you would have to get 800 different areas if you're going to try and restore that piece of land. Where if you're going to use the biodiversity support score, you can go to like 5.5% or even so 10% of those 800. So 80%, if you can focus on 80 different plant species, you can bring back almost a complete biodiversity and a stable ecosystem by just focusing on those a small group of plants. Now, I know several people sort of misunderstand what I'm trying to say there. I'm not saying you must ignore the other plants, because those other 80 to 90% of plants are still important. They still photosynthesize. They still anchor the soil and protect the soil. Their leaf matter will then decompose and nourish the soil. And they produce sort of photosynthesis. They capture carbon. And also they are the structure of an ecosystem where other animals can make their homes. They're still important, but they don't feed the trophic levels. So the encouraging part I find about this data is if you're now going to restore an area, as long as you have the plants with a high biodiversity support score among the mix, then you're going to sustain biodiversity. And we can almost say, like in a wild area, only 10 to 15% of the plants are supporting any biodiversity as food. But so if we can now reduce and so use some of the land for human use, as long as we have the plants there that support biodiversity, there's absolutely no reason that we can't coexist with animals and stop this rate of extinction that's happening on. So let's move on to our answer. So the answer for the first question, I hope it was 100% correct there, because I did really explain it before asking that. The next question is not so easy. All right. Okay, so looking at the different groups, so I based this whole system on butterflies and moths. They are important. They are fascists or the fussy eaters, and they can give us a very good indication of what to plant where. But they're not the only important things. So what I've done is I've taken that data as the basis, and then I've added in the data for which plants feed pollinators, which the bees and all the other pollinators. But in adult moths and butterflies, most of them have straws and drink nectar, so they are themselves pollinators. So we've got to get those plants in any case, even though the caterpillars don't eat some of them. The adults will drink the nectar. So I've incorporated the data for all the plants that feed the bees and other pollinators. And I've also then incorporated all the plants that support your birds and all the megafauna. So, and then also included the plants that then go and nourish the soil, especially those that are nitrogen fixers and can sequester nitrogen back into the soil. And I've used all this data to form a composite index, which is your biodiversity support score, which I've made available on the Abiri website, my website, which I'll show it to you later, which is www.ecorestoration.coza. And I'll go into more details how to use that in a moment. So basically, from what we can see, if we focused on pollinators only, and this is the global trend, let's plant for pollinators and have pollinator gardens. If you do that, you won't get your butterflies back, and you're not going to be able to get your buck and your birds back. If you focus on birds and buck, you're not going to get your butterflies or your caterpillars. But if we focus on caterpillars, you get the whole lot back. You can use them as a basis and bring back all the forms of life by focusing on the fussiest of the fussy eaters. So, spot question number 2. What proportion of indigenous plants is thought to support over 80% of all Lepidoptera? You give the specific answer. I want the actual percentage. So now looking at how I've created this composite index, the biodiversity support scores, we've numbered all the plants from a +5 to a -5. The +5s being dark green, they are the plants that produce and that feed more than 15 different species of caterpillars. They also provide abundant nectar and pollen for your pollinators, or they have a very, very high palatability score for your megafauna. There are some plants that are grazed, but the animals will starve on those grass. So we've taken the grasses and trees that buck and the large animals can eat and sustain and put on weight and sustain with those. So those are the high palatability score. And then it goes down. So then you've got your 4 threes, and the threes are the ones that are eaten by 1 to 4 different species of caterpillars. They have a low level of nectar and pollen and low palatability scores, but they still are eaten, even though they're not the greatest food. And then you've got your 2s, which are not eaten at all. These are the ones just photosynthesize and provide habitats to animals, but they are not food to the ecosystems. And then the ones are your exotic plants or those from a different biome, which they're not invasive, but they may be host to caterpillars or provide abundant nectar. And I've given them a positive score, but only that of 1. And then we've also incorporated the negative data. So the plants that are invasive, are exotic and non-invasive, but ecologically inert, are a -1. If they're exotic and invasive, they go from a -2 to -5. And the plants with a -5 score are those that are listed on the NEMBA category 1A and B. In other words, the highly, highly invasive plants, the ones that by law that you should be taking out, and whatever you do not propagate them. So we're trying to show people what they can remove to be able to restore ecosystems. So the answer to question number 2 was 5.5%. So we about 80% of all our Lepidoptera are supported by a really small percentage of 5.5% of our indigenous plants. That's not, that's excluding exotics. So now let's look at how the scores are spread over our different plants. So if this is just the plants on which we have reared caterpillars, in other words, we know these are the ones that feed our ecosystems. So you can see a very, very small percentage of 5, then you got a few more 4s, and then 3 are actually less than 4s. But if you now expand this to all of the plants, and so include the 2s and the 1s and down to your -5s, you can see there's a small small number are positive 5s, a very small number are negative 5, with the vast majority being a 2, and then you got your sum of 3s and 4s. So what we're trying to say here is focus on 3s, 4s, and 5s. If you can focus on getting those into whatever area you're managing, don't take out the 2s. Leave the 2s there. But you might have to take out a few if they're the dominant species, you might have to take a few out just to make space for the 3s, 4s, and 5s. But just make sure that you have a fair proportion of your plants are 3s, 4s, and 5s. And whatever you do, get rid of the negatives. Get rid of the -1, 2, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and they are doing harm. Those are the ones you must remove, but try keep everything positive with a skew towards those with a higher biodiversity score. Now, take note, these are the top, that was a hint. These are the top 20 plants, but from the whole area which we're sampling from the Caterpillarian group, which goes all the way up to it's almost to beyond the equator, so sub-Saharan Africa. So some of these are not South African, the grayed out ones, but the white ones here are all our South African tree plants. And as you can see by the growth form, most of them are trees or creeping plants. And that's a bit obvious when you think of it, because caterpillars often come out in large numbers. And if they're going to be a small plant, they're going to get eaten. And the plants are going to be eaten before the caterpillars can mature and pupate and form adults. So generally, they're trees, or they spread. They form a large amount of leaves and can recover after being eaten a lot. And I just made just push it in here. If you have a tree that does get completely denuded by caterpillars, it's nature. That is the way nature works. And generally, if a plant is denuded, it'll come back even stronger and will grow better once it grows its leaves back. It's nature. That's the way nature works. Okay, so the answer to question 2 was 5.5%. Did I tell you that before? Okay, no, it's 5.5%. Okay, now let's look at why do we absolutely have to get rid of our plants with a negative score. I've modeled what happens when you bring in a negative plant, a invasive plant into a mix. So there on our time point, sort of in the beginning, you've got a general mix of what a plant would be in an indigenous healthy system, all positives, with a small proportion being 5s. If you now come and put in your exotic invasives, this is what happens. They come in, and over time, they dominate. And it doesn't take long, so it's roughly about 29 of the reproductive cycles, depending on the plant. Some grow faster than the others. It's roughly sort of 20 to 30 reproductive cycles of that plant that they completely outcompete the indigenous, the good plants. And you see this throughout the world, actually, and especially in South Africa, where in our towns that are a bit older, those that are older than sort of 50 years, where the early European settlers in the country, they came into deep, dark Africa and brought with them their civilization. They brought in their medicine, their engineering, their roadworks, the literature, and with it, they brought their plants as sort of a bit of home and a bit of civilization. But little did they know that so many of those plants are highly, highly invasive. And now you look at your cities, you see it in Cape Town, look at it, the whole sort of Newlands area was one of the most diverse forests in the world, where now it's a monoculture of exotics. And the same in Johannesburg. We're so proud of our man-made forests, yet it's a man-made forest of plants that are exotic and almost nothing can survive. The only butterflies in Joburg now are the butterflies that can feed on exotics, with the exception of your Gardner Krea or your Krea horta, the same in the Cape Town. The Kigaleria africana is able to compete with the exotics, and that's about the only one the only indigenous plant that is supporting large numbers of butterflies in our cities. Most of the others are actually adapted to feeding on the exotic plants. And for example, citrus swallowtails, which are common, they are eating all your lemons. And this is why they're common. And for those that are feeding, who are the beekeepers, beekeepers can become quite aggressive about the blue gums. They want to protect the blue gums. The only reason these exotics are doing so well is because they're pollinated by bees. So we cannot focus on pollinators. But the pollinators will do as well. If we get the right indigenous plants in, they are as good pollinators as our exotic invasives. But we absolutely have to start focusing on the bigger ecosystems, not just pollinators. So what we nearly have to do is go to our systems, and we've got to aggressively get rid of the invasives. While trying to model this, it was a really interesting exercise because I had to try and work out, what proportion of exotics we had to get rid of in order to get rid of them. And the more you play with numbers, if you don't bring it down aggressively, you're wasting your time. If you don't take out, on average, sort of 70% of all the exotics within each growth cycle, they'll just grow back again. You have to be diligent and persistent and come in, and depending on the growth of the plant, some of them you've got to go in every couple of weeks, some every 6 weeks, sometimes months, but you absolutely have to get rid of up to 60 to 70% of your exotics in every cycle. Otherwise, you're going to lose the battle. So what are these exotics and how are they dispersed? So the general problems is your pod-bearing plants. Some examples of your -5s here are your jacarandas, wattles, robinia, oleander, and all of those. They produce pods which, in the wild setting, most of them would be eaten by animals, and their seed coat would be damaged as it passed through the gut. And then the plants, the seeds would then germinate. Or a fire comes through and disrupts the seed coat, and then they'll germinate. In most cases, the adaptive strategy of pods is for the seeds to survive very, very long periods so that when the conditions improve, they're then able to grow back. And plants like the wattles, it's been shown that those seeds can remain viable in the soil for up to 100 years. I mean, that is disastrous. So you've now got to come and clear those big patches of wattles. But for 100 years, you've got to make sure that there's no seed left and take it. Or we've got to find out ways to be able to destroy those seeds. So I just cannot emphasize enough. If you see an exotic with category 5 in an area which is wild, you absolutely have to take it out and then follow on and get every single seed out of that system for up to 100 years. And in urban areas, these plants typically aren't too problematic as long as they're not near a water system, because they fall down, the seeds sit down, there's no large mammals to eat them and distribute them or disperse them. So they generally are not problematic in a city area. My problem comes when there's rain and those seeds now get washed down into the river systems. And then those seeds come down the river systems and then completely populate the sides of rivers. And this is one of the reasons why every single river system in our country is completely destroyed or overtaken by exotics. It's actually tragic. You can go into the deepest part of the Karoo, and then you've got, mulberries and, wattles and poplars and privets, all these plants growing in faraway areas. And part of the problem is that in South Africa, because our industry is on the highlands, we destroy our river systems at the source. If you look at most other countries around the world, the civilization or the industry is around the coastline. So your ecosystems are in the highlands where humans don't live, and the industry is not there. So their rivers have sometimes hundreds of kilometers of undisturbed spaces where you can have healthy rivers, where unfortunately our coal reserves and our gold is up on the Highveld. And so this is why our rivers are in a dismal state. And we absolutely have to try and, aggressively go and get those exotics out. And I refuse to believe that we've lost the battle. If we can all work collectively, we can get our rivers back if we all focus on it. And the other major problem is berries. Now, with the berries, the mulberries, the syringas, privets, hawthorns, buckwheat, lantana, etc., their fruits, typically berries, are eaten by birds. Now, these are major problems because they plant them in the urban areas, and the birds come and eat these, and then the birds fly. Sometimes can fly hundreds of kilometers. They go and sit along a river system or go into a game reserve, and they go deposit those seeds in wilderness areas, which is why I don't think there's a square kilometer in this country which doesn't have some exotic that's been planted there by birds. So as a country, I think we all need to start focusing first on, in the wild areas, get rid of the pod bearing, getting away from the water systems. But all of us should be removing these berry producing exotics in our urban areas. Okay, spot question 3. Which animals are most responsible for moving invasive plants from towns into rivers and wild spaces? And what type of fruit or seeds do they usually transport? These questions are far too easy. There's 2 parts to the question. There should be 2 words in that answer. So if another problem with our ecosystems is this is a great map, produced by the World Wildlife Fund, where they look at the movement of animals. So if you look before humans came along, I've mentioned the pods. The pods were moved by your large mammals, eating them and depositing them in. So I think if we're going to sustain our ecosystems, we've got to fill in the gap where we've stopped things happening. And you can see here with, I just sort of focused in on South Africa. You can see there is no movement of animals, the large animals, between, the protected areas. And birds are doing a great job in dispersing bird-dispersed seeds. Our small animals, are moving, under fences and stuff, they can move. But it's anything that's blocked by a fence or a road. We've got to look at what seeds they disperse, and we've got to actively go and fill in the gap and be those animals and be those dispersers. And when we're in wild areas, go and collect those seeds, do whatever has to do them, boil them, whatever we've got to do to those seeds, and then go disperse them as if they were dispersed if those fences and the roads were not there. Okay, so the answer to the third one, easy. I should have made these questions far more difficult, but it's the birds and the berries. Okay, so another value that we can do with the biodiversity sports score, I'm going to show you just now, you can use it to be able to choose plants to get to where you are. Another way you can do is to map out areas on a sort of a 2-dimensional scale or plane, and you can now map out the biodiversity support score of the plants in a specific area. I mean, this is disastrous when I'm showing you over here. This will be red, and I've shown you why. Within a couple of life cycles of these plants, you're going to have a solid red quadrats over here. But if we can do the same thing in whether it be a game reserve, in your garden, in your local park, the river. We can start, and we can map out the areas, and then we can use that as a measure. And we can also predict what's going to happen in that land going forward. Will it deteriorate if we stop, managing it, or will it improve? And I'd like all of you to be able to get involved. Let's do the biodiversity support score wherever we are, and let's collectively try and increase. So this score, this plant, just looking at this quadrant, if I had to do the maths and you work it out, this is a -5. Yeah, no question. This is a -5, or a -4. And most parks where I've been to are sitting at a -3, -2. It's almost very, very few parks that are sitting positive. But why can't we not all work together and try and get our open spaces, our public spaces positive? And then over time, we can just see, when we're dead and gone and those plants are still producing seeds, we know that those areas will get healthier and healthier as time goes by. Okay, so why do we look at butterflies? I think by now you can see I'm not a lepidopterist by profession, but I have been converted to becoming a very pro butterflies. For my sins, I'm president of the LEPSOC, or Lepidopterist Society, and we're using butterflies as a way to do exactly what we're doing. And even as I was showing you in a map earlier, where even the Kruger Park, we're losing animals in the Kruger Park. So we're about to start a butterfly monitoring program, which will be starting in the sandparks. Our first one will be the Kruger Park. I was really hoping to be able to get going by this week, by the time the holiday started. But when you do things on a volunteer basis, everything is more challenging than ever. So we've missed our deadline, but hopefully early in the year, we'll be able to start the butterfly monitoring. And the idea is to expand throughout the country. So get in touch and you can become the stalwart for your area, the champion for your area, and we can start the butterfly monitoring. And through that, we can use it as an indicator, but as a way that we can get our biodiversity back, and we can use it then to work out, the corridors between the different areas. Because basically what we've done is we've put our wildlife into cages. and, animals can live in cages for a certain amount of time. If it's a big cage, they can live for a long time, but if it's a smaller cage, they can live for less time. But basically, over time, our animals are growing out their cages. The Kruger Park is too small for us animals. We have to find ways of corridors. Anyway, I can talk about this for an hour. But in nutshell, let's use our butterflies as an indicator, and we can use them to let our plant choices strengthen a living web and improve it. So where must you start? And as Arthur Ashe said, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And if we all had that attitude, we can restore and undo a lot of the harm that humans have done. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. I'm running out of time, but I need to try quickly show you the website. So I've tried to simplify things that you can find plants easily. So what I've done is I've created the biodiversity support score so that you can make it easy. And I've also combined that with all the botanical data, all the data that I think you'd find useful in order to growing it, and classification descriptions, how to grow them, what they're used for. And I've used this information, I put this information into a publicly available website. So the website has the growth form is the attributes, the biomes, so you can find your plants. And then you can go directly on the website and use the filters to find what you need. Or I'm hoping if you can go all nag your own nurseries, your favorite nurseries, go and nag them to get involved. They can get our tags. And then you can just use a QR code. It will then direct you to the various plants, and then it'll help you be able to select what you need. And this is the website, which I'm going to quickly take you to now. So this is the website. So the website, www.ecorestoration.coza. If you go into the landing page, it tells you a little bit, you scroll down, there's quite a bit of information. You can then go to the background. It gives you largely what I've told you today, but just in a different angle, but just the background. But what I want to show you now is your the plant selector. So in our databases, I've got way more than over 20,000 different plants. There's no ways I'll get every 20,000 here, but get in touch. You can help me to tell me which plants you want me to put on here. It's incredibly time consuming, so nothing happens quickly when you do things, without any money. So either you can give me money to help me get people to help me, or you must just be patient or contact our services somehow, and we can try and get this updated. But I've got about 200 plants here. Not all of them have photos. If they don't have photos, it means I haven't been able to check it yet. And my next batch is exotic plants. Again, I was really hoping to have them done by now, but there's just far too much to do, not enough hours in the day. But soon, within the next month or so, I'll have all the exotic stuff over there, which will give you all detailed information of how you can get rid of the exotics and which exotics you must focus on getting rid of first. So, but what you can use on this website for is you can come on here with this should be in a different order. You can start with your biome. So I know we've got lots of people in the fynbos online and around the country, but I'm going to start in the bushveld simply because the data is skewed towards the bushveld at the moment. But just get involved. If I know you're interested, we can focus on your biome, or you can help me get information on for your biome. But so this is already filtered, and if you notice, it's filtered back, and these are all plants that are indigenous to the bushveld areas. And now I can use my biodiversity support score. So I can now say, I want to only have 5s. I only want to have those that support more than 50 different species and the pollinators and blah, 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 everything else. They're good. They're supporting wildlife. And it's really filtered. And as I showed you earlier, mainly trees. Then I can say, what I want. In my garden, I've already got too many trees. What I really want now is I want to add, I need some grass and ground cover and possibly some grass. There's not many over there. You can see I need to populate it. Anyway, you can choose your different plants there. I've got no 5s there, so I can change it to a 4. Okay, now I'm getting start more. I can maybe do a 3. Anyway, and you're sort of selecting for the different plants. And through that, you can then choose whatever plant, or particular growth form, what use you want to do it. Another thing you can do is select for your special features. So let's say, I really want butterflies. I'm more interested in butterflies than in moths because I've maybe got a preschool and I want the little kids to be able to see butterflies. I can then choose, and this will be all of those bushveld, that bushveld plants. I've taken out the bushveld. you'll get, just hang on, what are we at? Okay, these are just these are the main host plants for butterflies. And there's other features. You can just play around, and I've tried to put several different filters. Or you can say I'm particularly interested in my my pollinators. You know, I've got flowers. I'm feeding my pollinators in autumn and early winter, but I want some for my other seasons. And then you can choose. So make sure you got the flowering plants at the right time. And depending on what pollinator you're looking at, if you know which the different colors, you know, for example, the bees don't look at red, they're mainly blues and whites and yellows. You can then choose the colors of your plants to be able to do your bees, or you want to particularly do your bats, you can have browns, or whatever typical butterfly that pollinator you're looking at, you can choose your pollinator color accordingly. And at the bottom, there's the horticultural map. So if you're not over concerned about getting what's indigenous to an area, at least you can find what grows in an area, and then that's the cultural map. Another way you can do it, let's say you know a plant, you can now put in what plant you want. So let's say we want to go for a karoo, because I just told you just now that it's the best plant. So now we're going into the Petulia karoo as a plant. So on there, you can see you've got the name of the plant, you've got its botanical name, its common name, and if you want to play around with all the vernacular names, it's quite fun, what they are, and then it goes to description. What it's all about. It gives you a couple of different photos of the plant, what it looks like, and then a bit of information here. You know, it's seeds, it's flowers, you know, what kind of growth rate it is, how big it gets, how long it lives, what color the flowers, you know, what kind of aspect it wants, what growing conditions it wants. That's all under general. Or I want to then go to my companion plants. So the companion plants, it's a bit small here, but it says a good association, a good fulfilling of different niches. And some plants have done a better job. And I've shown you exactly what other plants you should plant with it. Sometimes, yeah, this one needs improvement. And then caterpillars. I did tell you it hosts more caterpillars than any other. So here's your long list of all the different caterpillars that feed on your acacia. So if you now have a plant, let's maybe one with not so many, and you see a caterpillar on your plant, you can first of all go and look at the website, look at the caterpillars, and it will help you try and find to work out what caterpillar it is. If it's one that's not listed, then you know it's one that you should rear and add the data to the caterpillar rearing group. And just to sort of show you that I really am not only interested in caterpillars as much as they are my flagship, here is all the other different associations. So here it will tell you, you know, what other insects feed in it, what wildlife will use it, the primates, the large mammals, the domestic animals, other flora, the soil, ecosystem services for the plant. It always tell you about the fruits and the flowers, who pollinates it, who disperses it, and then how to propagate. So if it's exotic invasive, this would be how to eradicate. But here it's a good plant, so how are you going to propagate it yourself if needed? And then the traditional uses, you know, what the historical uses, medicinal use, you know, cultural, ecological restoration, all those, the information is there under traditional. But right at the top, it tells you, you know, it's a biodiversity sports score, but it tells you why. It tells you in a nutshell why that plant has the contact it does. Okay, so that's the website. So let's quickly go back to our presentation. And our last question. List 3 plant species with a biodiversity sports score of 5. Okay. And now I'm not going to get the answer for you because there's too many to list, so I'm going to review them just now. So put those into the group, into the chat. And I want to quickly just give you an example. I know we're short of time, but I want to quickly just show you that it really does work. My garden is lovely. I mean, it really is. But I haven't got photos and data for my garden. But I want to show you a garden in Nairobi in Kenya, which has been going for more than 40 years. Steve Collins, this is the Arbory Garden, the Butterfly Research Institute in Kenya, which he's been planting for butterflies for 40 years now. Don't look at the colors. Look at the different plants. Look at the diversity of plants. There's 1,500 plants in this garden, different species, and most of them support wildlife. With this garden, don't look at the color. It was taken with not such a great camera, but look at the plants. Typically plants that you're going to buy in a nursery, you know, not chosen for their biodiversity support, but just for looks and ease of growth. And the difference is in Steve's garden, I have never seen so many butterflies in any area. It's like walking into a flight house. There are hundreds of butterflies flying at any given time, and these huge, beautiful butterflies. And so we try to quantify to see, how different it is to other gardens. So what we did, he did timed counts in his garden and that other garden that I showed, and trapped and then counted the butterflies in the two different gardens. And you can see here, so the green is his garden, the orange is the neighbor's garden, just normal nursery stocked garden. And you'll see in both abundance and diversity. So in abundance, up to 400 different butterflies seen within an hour, or and in another garden, nothing more than sort of 40. And this is in a forest biome in Nairobi. And in the diversity, in his garden, anything sort of between 30 and 50 different species of garden butterflies within that time period, where anything up to sort of about 10 in the comparator garden. And the same with the traps. It's just to confirm, you get this huge disparity between the diversity and the number of butterflies in the garden when you just plant the right plants. But just to prove the point that it's not only about butterflies, these are animals in his garden, and he's got way, way more. He's got two different species of chameleons, two different species of bush babies, many different species of owls, birds. I mean, you can do your own huge bird lists in there. He really has brought the biodiversity back in a garden, which is in an urban area. It's if I'm not mistaken, I think it's an acre garden in a forest biome in Kenya. It really, really does work. You can bring back the biodiversity of butterflies, birds, bees, bugs, beetles, bats, and all the other wonderful animals by just focusing on planting the right plants. Okay, so this is my details. You can take them down. Please get in touch. You can get in touch via the website. That's ecorestoration.coza. There is a way that you can sign up for newsletters. When I get my life a bit more in order and get more people to help me, I'm trying to do too many things at the moment. But if I can get more help, we can try and get newsletters, and I'll get you. I can feed information, and because it's far too much to teach in 1 hour, get involved in the caterpillar rearing group and LEPSOC, the Lepidoptera Society of Africa, which is the Butterfly Society. Get involved, and together we can make a big difference. Okay, back to you, back to Brett.
Oh, wow, Lynn, what an unbelievable topic, and such detail about it, and just, like a needle in a haystack, as you say, you can't get through everything in 1 hour, but I feel motivated, and I think that our industry should be championing your cause and doing whatever we can to feed you the information to make this a resource. That website is a phenomenal resource, and I think if that could be developed not only for the industry but to get the information out there would be fantastic. And I would encourage everybody who can get involved to get involved in any way that they can. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. We do have lots of questions. With the third question, with your fourth and final question about the species, we've had lots of answers. Now, you put up a slide that had the top 20. I suppose, our first on the line, first on the go was Joan, who said the Boscia albictrunca, the Bacchia africana, and the Saltus africana.
Great. That's a winner.
There we go, Joan. Foster's Fingers wins, and that's our final spot prize for that. Thank you, Joan. Well done. Then I'll get on to our questions here. I know some people did post questions in the chat box. If you can repost them in the Q&A, otherwise there's just too much to go back through, and I'll start with what we've got here. So from Carly has asked us, how do we pick the best plant for our specific biome?
I'll go back to the website for that. Sorry, let's just take it back. Okay, so if you go to your if you go back to the plant selector, this bit here, where it's, with the map below, it says the biome. So as long as if you don't know what biome you are in, if you click on this map, you can look, you can see the color that's yours, and you can choose, work out what biome you are in. And once you got your biome, then you can come and just select over here. It will filter out Sorry, that's my phones. So there, can you see on that? If you the drop down for the under biome, it will then you just go and filter. So any plant that comes up will be filtered for those that are indigenous to your area.
Fantastic. Corin has asked, is
So
there
Brett,
room?
so
Yes,
Brett, if you don't, I've only got 200 on there, and I don't know which
of course.
areas are going to be most involved. So if your plants are not there, you're welcome to get involved. If it's going to be a big order, unfortunately, I am going to have to charge a bit if it's going to take too much time. But if I've got the data readily available, I'll give it and to help people in the different biomes. Or I can put in a newsletter. If you show me who's interested, I can put newsletters out for the different areas. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lynn. Is there room, Corin has asked, is there room for non-locally endemic plants in a garden? If yes, is there a maximum percentage? I can understand that it's more complex than that, but some guideline. And she said you've already partly answered the question, but thanks for the fantastic work and presentation.
Yeah, and that's the ones. They're not doing harm. It's a case of how much biodiversity do you want, and it's generally the pollen, many of your pollinators, your nectar producers. Lots of your nectaring plants are often your ones. They grow better, and there's generally in most of your butterfly gardens, we're using ones as nectar producers. But try get the rest. You're not going to be able to get your butterflies and all your diversity back. You're not going to get your birds back with the ones. You're going to get your birds back with the 3s, 4s, 5s. But no, absolutely put them in. And in terms of percentage, I think it all depends on how big your garden is. If you've got a tiny garden, just make sure that they're all sort of 3s, 4s, and 5s. And I think the way to answer that is more, what kind of diversity you want. Choose your 3s, 4s, and 5s, and then make it, fill up the rest with the other numbers.
Right. Janet has asked, where can we submit or feed information to the Caterpillar Research Group?
On INAT, if you go onto iNaturalist and you just search Caterpillar Rearing Group, and you've got to do it as two different. You've got to do an association with INAT, so you'll have to submit the plant and the caterpillar as separate observations, and then through the Caterpillar Rearing Group, it guides you. There's a whole drop-down feed, and it guides you how to submit the data.
Fantastic, thank you. Just a comment here from Liz, which is echoed by many across the whole talk. This has been a fantastic, fascinating presentation, data-driven, super exciting. Yeah, just a big thank you from a lot of people. So won't read everybody's, but that is a common thread through the chat and in the group. So thank you, Doctor. That's fantastic. Alexandro has asked you, what impact is the elephant overpopulation having on invertebrate biodiversity? Surely all that lost vegetation is having some detrimental impact.
Yeah, you saw it in the map that I showed. It's detrimental. Yeah, it's not only invertebrates. Yeah, no, it's having a severe impact. Yeah.
Okay. And then he follows on by saying, so basically it's not as simple as planting local. We need to plant very specific indigenous species to maximize biodiversity in urban areas that aren't hosting megafauna or complete ecosystems.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you got to choose your ecosystem for where you are. So, for example, and sometimes you don't want animals. So, for example, if you are in a game reserve, for example, you do want a little nice garden. You don't want the animals to come and eat everything in the garden that you're trying to impress your guests with. In that case, you would choose your 2s for your garden that is near the house to keep your animals away. So it also gives you the power to do that, and so push the animals away for those, or bring it the other way around. So you really got to do what I've tried to do is empower you to direct whatever you plant for what you're wanting, and we can possibly do another presentation another day. You can do the same thing to choose your predators. It's a bit complicated to answer now, but by your choice of your plants, you can then go and breed predators to control the pests on the plants that you really want, and in that way, completely you remove the need to use poisons. Yeah. So basically, I'm giving you the data to control nature by just putting the right plants in the right place.
Well, that's exactly it. Thank you. That's the end of the questions here, but I think you've hit the nail on the head. You've given a resource here. You've given the information is there. It's now up to people to take this forward and drive and work it forward. If people want to get involved, there's a resource there that can be built upon. It's about spreading the knowledge, talking to other people about it, and just understand. And then through that, there's enough information for us to build and grow this. And we would love to have you back and discuss this more and see how this develops and be part of helping you develop this very powerful resource. Because as you say, the fight isn't lost yet. And it's up to us to make sure that we don't look back and go, oh, what could we have done?
Yeah, excellent. No, thank you. And thanks, everyone. Thanks for the enthusiasm. It keeps me going. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for our final Wednesday talk. We've had a fantastic year. It's been a real privilege and honor to have present and introduce all of our speakers across the years. A huge thank you to Belinda, who works tirelessly in the background, organizing and getting everything set up for these talks. We couldn't do it without her. I'm wishing everybody a fantastic festive season and a great start to the new year. And we will be sending out information to our list about when we pick up our first talks, whether it's going to be in the end of January or possibly we'll start in the first Wednesday of February. We will confirm via the mailing list. Thanks once again, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Lynn. We really appreciate having you here. Thanks again, Belinda. Bye-bye, everybody. Keep well.
Thanks, everyone. All the best. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.